The snow in Seattle falls differently 3 days before Christmas. Soft and hesitant, like it knows it won't last. Alexander Bennett stood beneath the hospital's entrance awning, watching flakes melt against the glass doors decorated with paper snowflakes from the pediatric wing. The colored lights strung along the entrance flickered weakly, their attempt at holiday cheer only emphasizing how tired this place looked, how worn. But before we step deeper into this memory, tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Like this video so this story reaches more hearts, and subscribe to follow the next journeys. It was 2 a.m. on December 22nd, and Providence General Hospital hummed with its particular Christmas silence. Emergencies didn't stop for holidays, but there was something heavier in the air, a collective weight of people who'd rather be anywhere else. Alexander adjusted his security uniform, the cheap fabric nothing like the custom suits he'd worn to his family's Christmas galas. 6 months ago, he'd stood in the Fairmont Ballroom while his father toasted another record year for Bennett Pharmaceutical. Now he stood under fluorescent lights next to a half-dead Christmas tree someone had tried to revive with tinsel. He'd taken the name Alex Bennett when he applied. Not a lie, just incomplete. Alexander Thornton. Bennett III had walked out of his father's Christmas Eve party last year with nothing but a duffel bag and a conscience he couldn't silence anymore. His father had been celebrating profit margins, while Alexander thought about families choosing between Christmas presents and prescriptions. The automatic doors opened, admitting cold December air and a woman in pale blue scrubs. Sophie Turner had snowflakes melting in her dark blonde hair, a worn canvas bag over her shoulder, phone pressed to her ear. "Mom, I told you, I'll send it Friday," she was saying, exhaustion threading through her voice. "I know it's Christmas. I know." Her voice cracked. "Tell Dad I'm sorry I can't make it home. The hospital needs coverage. I miss you too." She ended the call with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every missed holiday, every sacrifice made in the name of bills that never stopped coming. Then she looked up and saw him by the security desk. "Working Christmas?" Alexander asked before he could stop himself. Sophie studied him with gray eyes that reminded him of winter storms. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the day after. Holiday pay is time and a half. She shifted her bag higher. "My family needs the money more than they need me at dinner. You're the new night guard, started in June?" "Alex," he offered, leaving off the Bennett. "Sophie, pediatric wing, usually, though tonight I'm in ER." She glanced toward the elevators where someone had taped a construction paper wreath. Christmas brings out the worst. Drunk drivers, family fights, loneliness. So much loneliness. The radio on his belt crackled. Alexander responded with the required codes, aware of Sophie still watching him with that nurse's instinct for reading pain. "You okay?" she asked. The question landed harder than it should have, 3 days before Christmas when everyone pretended they were fine. "Just tired," he said. Sophie nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. "Yeah, holidays are hard when you're not where you're supposed to be." She moved toward the elevators, and Alexander watched her go, noticing the careful stitching holding her sneakers together, the weariness she carried that went deeper than one missed Christmas. His shift passed in the usual rhythm, rounds through corridors decorated with aging garland, nodding to the skeleton crew who worked while the city slept before Christmas. But his mind kept returning to Sophie, to the way she'd looked at him like she could see past the uniform to something he was trying to hide. At 6 a.m., pale December light struggling through snow-heavy clouds, Alexander found himself in the break room. Someone had brought store-bought Christmas cookies and hung plastic mistletoe that was more sad than festive. He poured terrible coffee from a pot beneath a handwritten sign. "Merry Christmas from the night shift." "They make it terrible on purpose," a voice said behind him, "very in keeping with the Christmas spirit." Sophie leaned in the doorway, her ponytail destroyed, exhaustion etched deep. Kid came in around 3. 8 years old, asthma attack. Parents didn't refill his inhaler because they were saving money for Christmas presents. Her hands wrapped around her mug. He'll be okay. But they're going home to guilt and medical bills instead of joy. Alexander's stomach turned. Bennett Pharmaceutical had raised asthma medication prices 350% in 4 years. His father had announced it at last year's Christmas party as a success story. "It shouldn't be like this," Alexander said quietly. "Especially not at Christmas." Sophie really looked at him then, and Alexander felt exposed, like she could see the expensive education he tried to hide. The posture etiquette training had drilled into him, the weight of a name he'd abandoned. "You're not from here," she said. "I'm here now." Something passed between them in that break room, decorated with dying garland and plastic cheer. Recognition, maybe. Two people in the wreckage of their own lives 3 days before Christmas, trying to build something new from broken pieces. Sophie rinsed her mug and moved to the door, pausing at the threshold. "Get some sleep, Alex. You look like you're carrying something heavy, and that's hard enough without Christmas making everything feel bigger." Then she was gone, leaving him with bad coffee and an unasked question. What was he running from 3 days before Christmas, when everyone else was running toward home? Outside, snow continued falling, covering Seattle in white that would turn to slush by noon. Alexander stood at the window as "O Holy Night" played through ancient speakers, promising peace that felt impossibly far from the truth of this place, this night, this life he'd chosen. But Sophie's words lingered. "You're here now." Maybe that was enough. Maybe being here, doing this small thing, mattered more than all the charity galas his family performed while raising prices on life-saving medications. Maybe. But the doubt followed him into the snowy morning, 3 days before Christmas, settling in his chest like something permanent. December 23rd arrived cold and gray, the kind of Christmas Eve that made Seattle feel like the edge of the world. Alexander had worked at Providence General for 6 months now, and he'd learned the particular rhythm of holiday shifts, the way emergency rooms filled with people whose loneliness or anger finally boiled over, the families who waited until it was almost too late to bring in sick children because they'd been hoping to avoid hospital bills during Christmas. He'd also learned Sophie Turner's patterns, though he told himself he wasn't paying attention. She arrived every evening at 6:45, 15 minutes early, always carrying that worn canvas bag and her thermos. But tonight she also carried a shopping bag filled with small wrapped presents. Dollar store toys, Alexander guessed, the kind you bought when you wanted to give something, but had almost nothing to give with. "For the kids in pediatrics," she explained when she caught him looking. "Most of them will be here Christmas morning. Figured they should have something to unwrap." She said it casually, like it was nothing, like she hadn't spent money she clearly didn't have on children who weren't hers. Alexander felt something twist in his chest. Their shifts had developed a quiet rhythm over the past weeks, brief exchanges that felt larger than they should. A shared look when the coffee ran out. Small words in passing that lingered longer than necessary. And tonight, Christmas Eve, the hospital felt different. Quieter. More intimate somehow, like the approaching holiday had stripped away pretense and left only what was real. Around 10 p.m., Alexander was doing rounds on the 4th floor when he heard it. A child crying, the sound cutting through the muted Christmas music playing overhead. He followed it to the pediatric wing, where Sophie knelt beside a small girl in a hospital gown, maybe 5 years old, with dark curls and tears streaming down her face. "I know, sweetie. I know it hurts," Sophie was saying, impossibly gentle. "But I need you to be brave for just one more minute. Can you do that?" The girl nodded, and Sophie administered the injection with practiced care. But what struck Alexander wasn't the competence. It was what came after. Sophie stayed kneeling there, at the child's eye level, talking softly about the stuffed reindeer the girl clutched. "What's his name?" Sophie asked. Rudy, the girl whispered. Like Rudolph. Rudy is a perfect name, and I bet he's very proud of how brave you were. Sophie smoothed the child's hair back. You know what? Santa's going to hear about this. Being brave when you're scared, that's the best kind of brave. The girl's tears slowed into a watery smile. Sophie stayed until the child's mother returned, and only then did she stand, wincing as her knees protested. That's when she noticed Alexander in the doorway. How long have you been there? She asked. Long enough. You're good with her. Sophie shrugged, minimizing something that shouldn't be minimized. It's just the job. No, Alexander said firmly. It's not. Something shifted in her expression. Walk with me? I'm due for a break, and if I sit down, I'll fall asleep. They ended up on the roof, technically restricted, but Sophie had a key she wasn't supposed to have. Seattle spread out before them, the city lights reflecting off low clouds, making everything glow soft and strange. Snow had started falling again, dusting the rooftop white. Christmas Eve tomorrow, Sophie said, leaning against the railing. My family does this thing. We all make tamales together. My abuela's recipe. Takes all day, but it's... She smiled, complicated and sad. It's tradition. I haven't missed it in 10 years. Until now. Why stay? Alexander asked, though he thought he knew. Because the hospital pays double time on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Because my little sister wants to go to college and someone has to help pay for it. Because my dad still can't work full-time after his cancer treatment bankrupted us. She said it matter-of-factly, but her hands gripped the railing tighter. We didn't have good insurance. The kind that keeps you alive but drowns you in debt doing it. Each word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward to touch something Alexander had been trying to keep submerged. His family's company, the prices they'd raised, the people they'd hurt. I put myself through nursing school, Sophie continued. 3 jobs, student loans I'll be paying off until I'm 50. But I did it because someone has to care about people more than profit margins, right? She laughed, hollow. That probably sounds naive. No, Alexander said quietly. It sounds brave. Sophie turned to look at him, snowflakes catching in her hair, the city lights reflecting in her gray eyes. What about you, Alex? What's your story? The lie sat ready on his tongue, but standing there with Sophie's honesty hanging between them like something sacred, he couldn't quite use it. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not who I was supposed to be, he said carefully. Sophie studied him for a long moment. That's the most honest non-answer I've ever heard. Running from something? Trying to run toward something. Just not sure what yet. She nodded like she understood. Well, whoever you are now, the guy who notices when people are good at their jobs, who doesn't look away when kids are crying, he seems solid. Something cracked open in Alexander's chest. Thank you. They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow fall on Seattle the night before Christmas Eve. Below, the hospital hummed with lives being saved and lost, people fighting battles both visible and invisible. I should get back, Sophie said, but didn't move immediately. Alex, Merry Christmas. If I don't see you tomorrow. Merry Christmas, Sophie. She smiled, warm and sad, then headed toward the door. But she paused at the threshold. You know what I think? I think Christmas is just another day when you're carrying something heavy. But maybe it's easier to carry when you're not alone. Then she was gone, and Alexander stood on that roof watching snow fall, realizing he was thinking about her in a way that had everything to do with how her voice gentled with scared children, how she carried exhaustion with dignity, how she'd looked at him like he was worth being honest with. It was dangerous, this feeling. He had no business wanting anything. Not when his life was a carefully constructed fiction. Not when the truth could destroy whatever fragile thing was building between them. But he wanted it anyway, and that terrified him more than anything his father had ever threatened. Christmas Eve morning arrived with the kind of cold that made Seattle feel like a different city entirely. Alexander had just finished his shift when he decided to walk through Pike Place Market, partly because sleep wouldn't come, partly because being alone in his apartment on Christmas Eve felt unbearable. The market was crowded with last-minute shoppers, the air thick with coffee and fresh pine and desperation. Vendors had decorated their stalls with garland and lights, trying to coax final sales from people whose credit cards were already maxed out. Alexander was contemplating a bouquet of winter roses when he heard her laugh. Not the professional sound Sophie used at work. This was unguarded, genuine, the kind of laugh that made strangers smile. She stood at a produce stand wearing jeans with patches at the knees and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less burdened, and something in Alexander's chest ached at the sight. He should have walked away, but his feet moved before his mind could stop them. "Those won't last more than 2 days," he said, nodding at the discounted apples she was buying. Sophie turned, surprise flickering into something warmer. "Alex. Hi." She glanced at the apples. "They're half price because they're bruised. I'm making pie for my neighbor. She just had surgery and she's alone for Christmas." Of course she was. Of course Sophie Turner spent Christmas Eve baking for someone else. "You bake?" "When I can afford ingredients." She paid for the apples. "What are you doing here?" "Existing," Alexander said, then realized how strange that sounded. Walking, thinking. Sophie studied him with those gray eyes. "Want company? There's a coffee shop nearby that doesn't taste like punishment." They ended up at a small cafe tucked between tourist shops, locals only, the kind of place that felt like a secret. The coffee was actually good, and they sat by rain-streaked windows watching the market's chaos outside. Christmas music played softly. "I'll be home for Christmas." And Alexander tried not to think about how neither of them would be. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "Why security? You're clearly educated. I can tell by how you talk, the books you read on breaks. You could do something else." The question he'd been dreading. "I needed something simple. Something that didn't require me to be anyone in particular." Sophie nodded slowly. "Running toward something. Are you getting closer to figuring out what?" "Maybe," Alexander said, looking at her across the table. "Maybe I am." Something passed between them. Recognition, possibility, a question neither was ready to ask. Sophie broke eye contact first, color rising in her cheeks. "I should go. Need to get this pie made before my shift." She stood, then paused. "Let me walk you part way." They walked through the market together, shoulders occasionally brushing, and Alexander felt hyper-aware of every point of contact. Sophie talked about her week, a difficult patient, her sister's college applications, the leak in her apartment she couldn't afford to fix. "I'm boring you," she said suddenly. "No, you're not." Sophie looked up at him, light snow beginning to fall. "You're a good listener, Alex. That's rare. You're easy to listen to." They stood on a corner, snow falling around them, the city decorated for a holiday neither of them would properly celebrate. Alexander thought about reaching out, about brushing snow from her hair, about closing the distance between them. But the weight of everything he wasn't telling her stopped him. "I live 3 blocks that way," Sophie said. "I'm good from here." "Sophie," Alexander said, and she paused. "That thing you said on the roof, about carrying something heavy. You were right." She waited, patient and present. I'm trying to figure out if I can be someone better than who I was. But I don't know if you can outrun your past or if it always catches up. Sophie stepped closer, near enough that he could smell her shampoo. Vanilla. Simple. I think who we were matters less than who we're trying to become. And you're trying, Alex. I can see that. What if trying isn't enough? Then you try harder. And maybe you let people help you. She touched his arm. Brief, gentle. You don't have to carry everything alone, especially not at Christmas. Then she was walking away through the snow, leaving Alexander on that corner with the ghost of her touch burning through his jacket. That night at work, Christmas Eve night, everything felt different. The hospital had a skeleton crew, and the hallways seemed both emptier and more intimate. Every time Alexander passed the pediatric wing, he looked for Sophie. And when their paths crossed around midnight, she smiled at him in a way that acknowledged something unspoken. Around 2 a.m., they found themselves in the break room again. Someone had left a plate of homemade cookies, real ones this time, not store-bought, and the small TV in the corner played "It's a Wonderful Life" with the sound off. My family's probably finishing tamales right now, Sophie said softly, staring at the silent movie. My abuela always cries during the prayer before we eat. Every single year. I'm sorry you're not there. I'm sorry you're not wherever you're supposed to be either. She looked at him. Do you have family, Alex? Yes, but we don't see things the same way. What things? Alexander felt the lie and the truth warring in his throat. What matters? How you treat people. Whether money is more important than... He stopped, couldn't finish. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My dad almost died because he couldn't afford his medication. Cancer treatment bankrupted us, but it was the medication after that really destroyed us. The company that made it raised the price by 400% over 5 years. Just raised it. Because they could. Alexander felt like he'd been punched. Sophie, I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because I think you'd understand. I think you know what it's like when the system is broken and you're powerless to fix it. She looked at him with those storm gray eyes. Sometimes I see that same anger in you. Like you've seen how wrong things are, and it's eating you alive. She was right. She was so right it hurt. But she didn't know she was looking at the person responsible, the family that had caused her father's suffering, the name that represented everything she fought against every single day. I need to tell you something, Alexander started, but his radio crackled. Emergency in the ER, all security to respond. The moment shattered. They both stood, duty calling, and Sophie touched his hand briefly before heading toward the emergency. Later, she said. Tell me later. But Alexander stood alone in that break room on Christmas Eve, watching James Stewart mouth silent words about wonderful lives on the screen, and wondered if there would be a later. Wondered if the truth would destroy this thing between them before it even had a chance to become something real. Outside, somewhere in Seattle, families were gathering. Presents were being wrapped. Children were trying to stay awake to catch Santa. And Alexander Bennett stood in a hospital break room, surrounded by fake cheer and real pain, falling for a woman who would hate him if she knew who he really was. Merry Christmas, he thought bitterly. Merry Christmas indeed. Christmas morning arrived without fanfare. Just another shift change. Just another gray Seattle dawn. Except the streets were empty and the hospital felt like the loneliest place on earth. Alexander had worked through the night, and exhaustion had settled into his bones in a way that felt permanent. He should have gone home, should have slept. But he found himself in the hospital cafeteria instead, drinking burnt coffee while families trickled in for early visiting hours, carrying wrapped presents and forced smiles. That's when he saw the newspaper someone had left on the table. Bennett Pharmaceutical under fire. Christmas Day, Price, hike, sparks. Outrage. His blood went cold. Below the headline was his father's photo, Richard Bennett on courthouse steps, wearing that practiced expression of concern that meant nothing. And beside it, a smaller story. A mother in Tacoma who'd been rationing her daughter's insulin, trying to make it stretch. The daughter, 15 years old, had died on Christmas Eve. Alexander's hands shook as he read. The price increase, 30%, effective December 1st, had been approved by the board while he'd been working security at night, pretending his absence was protest enough. The article quoted his father. Bennett Pharmaceutical remains committed to innovation and accessibility, but market forces require periodic adjustments. Market forces. That's what his father called a teenage girl dying on Christmas Eve. The newspaper crumpled in his fist. He'd been a coward. He'd walked away and called it principles, had taken a minimum wage job and called it penance, when all he'd really done was make himself comfortable in his guilt while people died. While Sophie's father went into debt. While a 15-year-old girl spent her last Christmas rationing insulin. Alex? Sophie's voice cut through the spiral. She stood a few feet away in fresh scrubs. She must have just arrived for a day shift, concern written across her features. What's wrong? Nothing. But his voice came out hollow, sharp-edged. Sophie moved closer, saw the newspaper, saw his expression. Alex, talk to me. There's nothing to talk about. That's not true. She reached for him, and Alexander instinctively stepped back. Hurt flickered across her face. What happened? You should go. I'm fine. You're not fine. Sophie, please. He couldn't look at her. Just go. The silence stretched painful and long. Then Sophie said quietly, her voice thick, It's Christmas, Alex. Whatever this is, you don't have to carry it alone. But he did. He had to carry it alone because telling her the truth meant losing her. And he was selfish enough to want a few more days, a few more shifts, a few more stolen moments before everything fell apart. Sophie left, and Alexander sat alone with the newspaper and his guilt, hating himself more than he thought possible on Christmas morning. His shift should have ended at 8 a.m., but Roger called in, some Christmas emergency with his kids. And Alexander stayed, grateful for the distraction. The hospital had a strange quality on Christmas Day. Quiet but tense. Everyone waiting for something to go wrong because it always did. Around 2 p.m., it went wrong. Alexander was on the 3rd floor when he heard shouting. A man's voice, angry and desperate. He reached the room to find a nurse backing toward the call button while a middle-aged man, worn-looking and shaking, held a prescription paper in his trembling hand. $800, the man was shouting. $800 for insulin. How am I supposed to... My daughter needs this to live, do you understand? To live. The nurse, young and frightened. Sir, I understand, but... Don't tell me you understand. The man's voice cracked. Don't tell me anything unless you can tell me how I'm supposed to pay rent and keep my daughter alive. Alexander moved into the room, security training overriding the way his stomach twisted. Sir, I need you to calm down. The man turned, and Alexander saw everything in his face: exhaustion, terror, the desperate fury of watching the system destroy someone you love. The same expression he'd seen when Sophie talked about her father. Security, the man said bitterly. Of course. Can't have people complaining about being priced out of staying alive. Bad for business, right? Every word was a knife. Every word was true. Sir, please. You know what company makes my daughter's insulin? The man waved the prescription. Bennett Pharmaceutical. You know what they did last month? Raised the price 30%, right before Christmas. His voice dropped to something raw and broken. My daughter is going to die because some rich family wanted a bigger bonus this year. The room spun. Alexander felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of his name crushing him. He wanted to fall to his knees, wanted to confess everything, wanted to give this man every penny in his trust fund if it would save his daughter. But it wouldn't. It wouldn't save anyone. "I'm sorry," Alexander whispered, the most inadequate words in existence. "Yeah," the man said, looking at him with something like pity. "Me too." Hospital security arrived, the real security, and escorted the man out. The crisis was over. Except it wasn't over at all. Alexander made it to the stairwell before his legs gave out. He sat on cold concrete steps, head in his hands, and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd been running from. His family's company had names, faces, families. It had that man's daughter. It had Sophie's father. It had blood on its hands. And so did he. He didn't know how long he sat there before Sophie found him. She must have heard about the incident because she came prepared. Her expression said she understood, even if she didn't know why. "Alex, don't." He couldn't look at her. "Please." But Sophie sat beside him anyway, close but not touching, waiting. "My name isn't just Alex," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "It's Alexander. Alexander Thornton Bennett III." The silence that followed was deafening. He forced himself to look at her, to see the moment she understood. Recognition dawned slowly, then horror. "You're the Bennett family, Bennett Pharmaceutical." "Yes." Sophie stood abruptly, and Alexander saw her hands shaking. "The company that prices people out of medicine. The company that almost killed my father. That did kill that girl on Christmas Eve." "I know. That's why I left." "You left." Her voice rose. "You just left. And that fixed it? That made it okay?" "No. Nothing makes it okay." "Do you know what it's like?" Sophie's voice cracked, months of exhaustion and anger finding a target. "Working 3 jobs to pay for school because medical debt destroyed your family? Watching your father ration pills because your company decided profit mattered more than lives? Sophie, please. I told you everything. About my family, my father, all of it. And you just listened. You let me tell you while knowing." She pressed her hands to her face. "God, I'm so stupid." "You're not stupid. I should have told you." "When, Alex? When should you have told me? Before or after I started trusting you?" The words hit like physical blows. "I was afraid," Alexander said desperately. "I was afraid of losing you." "You never had me to lose, because you never let me know who you really were." Sophie's voice went cold, and somehow that was worse than anger. "I need to go. I can't. I need to think." "Sophie, wait." But she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Alexander wanted to call after her, wanted to explain, to promise he'd fix everything somehow. But what could he say? Sorry didn't bring back the dead. Sorry didn't erase debt, or lower prices, or undo the damage. Sorry was just a word. And words meant nothing next to the weight of what his family had done. He sat alone in that stairwell on Christmas afternoon, while the hospital hummed around him. Through a small window, he could see Seattle gray and cold, families somewhere opening presents, sharing meals, pretending the world was good. And Alexander understood, finally, that there was no running from this. The past didn't stay buried. It rose up and demanded payment. The only question was whether he was brave enough to pay it. The day after Christmas passed in a blur of shame and silence. Alexander called in sick to work, couldn't face the hospital, couldn't risk seeing Sophie and watching her look through him like he didn't exist. He spent the day in his apartment staring at his phone, drafting and deleting messages that all sounded hollow. "I'm sorry" meant nothing. "Let me explain" implied there was an explanation that mattered. please talk to me was selfish when she had every right to never speak to him again. By the second day, Alexander knew what he had to do. Not because it would fix anything, it wouldn't, but because Sophie deserved to know the whole truth. And because staying silent had never been courage, it had been cowardice dressed up as self-preservation. He spent December 27th making calls he should have made months ago. To lawyers, to journalists, to the board members at Bennett Pharmaceutical who'd expressed private doubts about the company's pricing strategies, but never had the spine to fight Richard Bennett publicly. Alexander might not be able to undo the damage, but he could make sure it stopped. And if that meant burning every bridge to his old life, destroying his inheritance, making himself an enemy to his own family, so be it. On December 28th, he went back to work. Sophie was there. He'd checked the schedule obsessively, but she avoided him with practiced efficiency. When their paths crossed in hallways, she looked through him like he was invisible. It hurt worse than anger would have. Around 2 a.m., Alexander found her in the pediatric wing, organizing donated toys from Christmas. She worked with mechanical precision, not looking up even though she obviously knew he was there. "Sophie," he said quietly. "Please, 5 minutes. I'm working. I know, but I need to tell you something. And then if you want me to leave you alone forever, I will." Sophie's hands stilled on a stuffed bear. She didn't look at him, but she didn't walk away either. Alexander took a breath. "You were right. About everything. Leaving wasn't enough. It was cowardice. I walked away from my family's company and told myself that made me innocent, but people kept dying while I played at being someone else." His voice cracked. "That girl on Christmas Eve, I read her name. Melissa Chen, 15 years old. She wanted to be a veterinarian." Sophie's shoulders tensed, but she stayed quiet. "I can't undo what my family did. I can't bring back Melissa or erase your father's debt or fix any of it. But I can make sure it stops." He pulled out his phone, showed her the emails he'd sent. "I've contacted 3 journalists who've been investigating pharmaceutical pricing. I've given them everything: internal documents, pricing strategies, board meeting minutes. Everything I managed to copy before I left." Sophie finally turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I've also started the process of establishing a foundation using my trust fund. All of it. It'll provide medication assistance to families who can't afford prescriptions. It won't fix the system, but it might help some people." He met her eyes. "I should have done this months ago, years ago. I was just too scared." "Scared of what?" Sophie asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Of my father, of losing my family, of admitting that I'd been complicit in something monstrous just by staying silent." Alexander felt tears burning behind his eyes. "And then I met you, and I was scared of losing you too. So I kept lying, kept hiding, and that makes me exactly the kind of coward I always hated." Sophie set down the stuffed bear, her movements slow and deliberate. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth, all of it. Not because I think it'll make you forgive me. I don't expect that. But because you were honest with me about your pain, and I owed you the same honesty about mine." The silence stretched long. Somewhere down the hall, a machine beeped steadily. Christmas decorations still hung from the ceiling, looking sadder now that the holiday had passed. "I don't know what to say," Sophie said finally. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I'm trying to be better, trying to actually do something instead of just running away." Alexander's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And I needed you to know that meeting you changed something in me, made me realize that being comfortable in my guilt was another form of selfishness." Sophie's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You hurt me, Alex. You let me trust you while hiding something that mattered. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sorry doesn't fix things. No, but action might. Or at least it might prevent more harm. He took a breath. My father is threatening to sue me for breach of fiduciary duty and theft of corporate property. The family lawyers are drawing up papers to contest my inheritance. By next week, I'll probably be completely cut off. Sophie studied him for a long moment. And you're okay with that? I should have done it a year ago, 2 years ago. The first time I saw what they were doing and felt sick about it. Alexander met her gaze. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sophie. I'm just asking you to believe that I'm trying to be someone worthy of the way you saw me. Before you knew, a tear slipped down Sophie's cheek, and she wiped it away impatiently. I want to hate you. I know. You represent everything I fight against. Everything that's broken in this system. I know that too. But you're also the person who noticed when kids were scared, who drank terrible coffee without complaining, who looked at me like I mattered. Her voice broke. How am I supposed to reconcile those things? I don't know, Alexander said honestly. Maybe you can't. Maybe who I was and who I'm trying to be are too far apart. Sophie turned away, pressing her palms to her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. My father almost died, Alex. We lost our house. My mother worked 3 jobs. I had to drop out of school for a year to help support the family. Your company did that. Yes. And you want me to just... what? Forgive you because you're trying to make amends now? No. I want you to know that I see the harm. That I'm not asking you to carry my guilt for me or absolve me of responsibility. I'm just trying to do better, even if it's too late to matter. Sophie stood still for a long moment, her back to him, shoulders shaking slightly. Then she turned, and her expression was raw and complicated and real. I need time, she said. I need to think about this. About you. About whether trying is enough. Take all the time you need. And Alex? Sophie's voice was soft but firm. If you're serious about this, about actually changing things, don't do it for me. Do it because it's right. Because people like my father and that little girl deserve better. Can you do that? Alexander nodded, his throat too tight for words. Sophie held his gaze for another moment, then walked past him toward the elevators. But before she disappeared around the corner, she paused and looked back. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I believe you're trying, and that's something. Then she was gone, and Alexander stood alone in the pediatric wing surrounded by donated toys and fading Christmas decorations, feeling like maybe, just maybe, he'd taken the first real step toward redemption. Outside, Seattle was cold and gray, the last remnants of Christmas snow turning to slush. But somewhere in that gray, something small and fragile had survived. Hope, maybe. Or just the possibility of it. The first article dropped on New Year's Eve. Whistleblower exposes Bennett pharmaceutical pricing strategies. Internal documents reveal systematic exploitation. Alexander's phone exploded with messages, most from lawyers, some from journalists, a few from old colleagues expressing either support or betrayal depending on their relationship with his father. He ignored them all except the one from his attorney confirming what he already knew. Richard Bennett had officially disowned him and frozen all family assets pending litigation. Alexander felt nothing but relief. What he didn't expect was the knock on his apartment door at 11 p.m., an hour before midnight. He opened it to find Sophie standing there in jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair damp from rain, holding a newspaper. You did it, she said, holding up the front page. You actually did it. I told you I would. Sophie stepped inside without asking, and Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. She looked around his apartment, sparse, impersonal, the living space of someone still not sure where home was. "This is going to destroy your family," she said, not quite a question. "My family destroyed themselves. I just documented it." Sophie set down the newspaper and turned to face him. The article mentions a foundation for medication assistance. "It's being established as we speak. Every penny of my trust fund, plus whatever else I can liquidate." Alexander managed a bitter smile. "Turns out I'm good for about 40 million once the lawyers finish. It'll help a lot of families. Not enough, but something." $40 million. Sophie's voice was faint. "You're giving away $40 million. It was never really mine. It was built on suffering." Sophie stared at him for a long moment, and Alexander couldn't read her expression. Then she crossed the space between them and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But when Alexander responded, pulling her closer, it deepened into something that felt like forgiveness and hope, and the beginning of something real. When they finally broke apart, Sophie's eyes were bright with tears. "I'm still angry with you," she whispered against his lips. "I know. And I still don't know if I can fully trust you. I understand. But I think you're trying to be better, and maybe that's enough to start with." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. "I don't deserve you." "No," Sophie agreed. "You don't. But maybe you will someday." They stood there in his sparse apartment as the clock ticked toward midnight, holding each other like anchors in a storm. Outside, Seattle was preparing for New Year's Eve celebrations, fireworks ready to light up the sky, people ready to believe that January 1st could mean new beginnings. "Stay," Alexander said softly. "For New Year's. For tonight. For as long as you want." Sophie pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I work tomorrow. Day shift, 7 a.m. I'll drive you." She smiled, real and warm and complicated. "Okay." They spent New Year's Eve on his couch, eating takeout Chinese food and watching the ball drop on TV while Alexander's phone continued buzzing with messages he continued ignoring. At midnight, when the fireworks started, Sophie kissed him again, and this time it felt less like forgiveness and more like promise. "New Year's resolution?" she asked, her head on his shoulder. "Be someone worth knowing," Alexander said. "Actually earn redemption instead of just hoping for it." "That's a good one." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Mine is to let myself be happy, even when it's complicated, even when it's scary." "Think we can manage?" "Maybe, if we help each other." But the peace was short-lived. On January the 2nd, Richard Bennett held a press conference. Alexander watched it from the hospital break room during his shift, Sophie beside him, both of them silent as his father spoke to assembled reporters. "My son has chosen to betray his family and spread malicious falsehoods about a company that has improved millions of lives," Richard said, his voice heavy with false sorrow. "It's clear he's struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues. As his father, I'm committed to getting him the help he needs." Alexander felt Sophie's hand find his. "He's trying to discredit you," she said quietly. "I know. It's a standard play." Alexander watched his father's performance with detached clarity. Paint the whistleblower as unstable, question their motives, make it about family drama instead of corporate malfeasance. Will it work? Probably with some people, but the documents speak for themselves. He squeezed her hand. "And I have 3 major newspapers backing the story. He can't bury this one." Sophie turned to face him fully. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. You know that, right? Your father won't stop. Neither will I. Then we do it together." Sophie's voice was fierce, determined. "You expose what they did. I'll testify about what it cost my family. We make them answer for it. Alexander felt something unlock in his chest. You don't have to do that. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. It's been my fight since the day my father couldn't afford his medication. Since the day I had to choose nursing school over helping my family immediately, because long-term I could help more. She stood, pulling him up with her. You want to make amends? You want to actually change things? Then let's do it right. Together. Over the next 2 weeks, they built their case. Sophie connected Alexander with other families who'd been affected by Bennett Pharmaceuticals' pricing. They gathered testimonials, medical bills, stories of loss and suffering that put faces to the statistics. Alexander walked reporters through internal documents, explaining pricing strategies designed to maximize profit while maintaining just enough assistance programs to deflect criticism. It was exhausting. It was painful. Some days Alexander wondered if he was doing enough, if anything he did could ever balance the scales. But Sophie was there, steady and strong, reminding him that perfect redemption wasn't the goal. Consistent, genuine effort was. On January 15th, the Congressional Committee on Healthcare Pricing announced an investigation into Bennett Pharmaceutical. On January 18th, 3 major insurance companies announced they were dropping Bennett medications from their formularies pending price reductions. On January 20th, Richard Bennett was subpoenaed to testify before Congress. Alexander and Sophie watched the news together in her apartment. She'd finally invited him over, and it was small and worn, but filled with warmth his childhood mansion had never had. Photos of her family covered the walls. Books were stacked in corners. It smelled like vanilla and coffee and home. You did it, Sophie said, curled against his side. You actually made them answer for it. We did it, Alexander corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. Sophie looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something he'd been afraid to hope for. Not just forgiveness, but trust. The fragile, hard-won kind that came from seeing someone at their worst and choosing to believe in their potential for better. I love you, Alexander said, the words surprising him even as they felt inevitable. I know it's too soon and I know I have no right, but I do. I love you. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her hand over his heart. Then she smiled, soft and real and utterly transformative. I love you too, she said. Even though you're a complete disaster and this is definitely too complicated, and we probably should have taken things slower. Alexander laughed, the sound free and genuine in a way he hadn't felt in years. Terrible timing? The worst. But Sophie was laughing too, and then she was kissing him, and it felt like every new beginning wrapped into one moment. Outside, Seattle rain fell steady and sure, washing the city clean one drop at a time. And inside Sophie's small apartment, 2 people who'd both been running finally stood still, finally let themselves believe that redemption might be possible, that love could grow even in broken soil. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Richard Bennett wouldn't go down quietly. The legal battles would drag on for months, and changing a broken system took more than good intentions and leaked documents. But tonight, they had each other. And that felt like enough to build something real on. Spring arrived in Seattle like a promise being kept. Alexander stood at the window of the Foundation's new office, modest, functional, nothing like the Bennett Pharmaceutical Tower that dominated the downtown skyline, and watched cherry blossoms drift past on warm April air. 3 months since the articles broke. 3 months since his life had imploded and rebuilt itself into something he actually recognized as worth living. The congressional hearings had concluded 2 weeks ago. Richard Bennett had been forced to resign as CEO. The company had agreed to roll back prices and establish a genuine patient assistance program with independent oversight. It wasn't everything. The system was still broken in 1,000 ways. But it was something. It was a start. Alex? Sophie's voice came from the doorway. They're here. Alexander turned to find her smiling, wearing a sundress the color of spring leaves, her hair loose around her shoulders. Even after 3 months together, the sight of her still made his heart stutter. She'd moved in with him last month. They'd found a small house in Capitol Hill with a garden she wanted to plant vegetables in. It was nothing like the mansion he'd grown up in, and that made it perfect. "How many?" he asked. 12 families, including the Chens. Alexander's breath caught. Melissa Chen's parents. He'd reached out to them weeks ago to offer condolences and support. They'd agreed to come to the foundation's official opening, though he didn't expect forgiveness, didn't deserve it. The office filled with people, families who'd been affected by pharmaceutical pricing, nurses and doctors who'd fought the system, journalists who'd helped expose the truth. Sophie stayed close, her hand in his, steady and sure. When Melissa Chen's mother approached, Alexander felt his throat close. But she looked at him with clear eyes and said, "Thank you for trying to make this right, for my daughter's memory." "I'm so sorry," Alexander managed. "I'm so sorry I didn't act sooner." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "You can't change the past. None of us can. But you're changing the future. That matters." It wasn't absolution. He didn't expect that. But it was acknowledgement. It was permission to keep trying. The event passed in a blur of faces and stories, each one a reminder of why he'd burned his old life down. By evening, when the last guests had left, Alexander and Sophie sat alone in the empty office, exhausted and hopeful in equal measure. "You okay?" Sophie asked, her head on his shoulder. "Yeah, I think I am." "Your father sent flowers." She gestured to an elaborate arrangement by the door, the card signed simply Richard Bennett. No message beyond the name. Alexander looked at the flowers. Expensive, impersonal. His father's version of a white flag without actually surrendering. "What should I do with them?" "Whatever you want. They're yours to accept or reject." Alexander thought about it for a long moment, then said, "Let's donate them to the hospital, the pediatric wing." Sophie smiled against his shoulder. "Perfect." They sat in comfortable silence as Seattle twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Through the window, Alexander could see the city transforming with the season. Trees blooming, people shedding winter coats, the world remembering how to be hopeful again. "I got my acceptance letter today," Sophie said quietly. "For the nurse practitioner program." Alexander sat up straight. "Sophie, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I'm scared." She looked at him with vulnerable eyes. "It's 2 years, full-time. I'd have to cut back to part-time work. And I can't afford—" "The foundation has an education fund," Alexander interrupted gently. "For healthcare workers who want to advance their training. You'd qualify." Sophie shook her head. "I can't take money from you." "It's not from me. It's from the foundation. There's a selection committee and everything. I made sure I couldn't personally approve applications to avoid conflicts of interest." He took her hands. "Apply. Let them judge you on merit, which means you'll definitely get it because you're brilliant." Tears gathered in Sophie's eyes. "This is really happening. All of it. The foundation, the price rollbacks, families getting help. You made this happen." "We made this happen," Alexander corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." Sophie kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling through tears. "You know what today is?" Alexander thought for a moment, then realized. 3 months since New Year's Eve. 3 months since I decided to take a chance on a reformed pharmaceutical heir with a hero complex. Reformed is generous. I'm still working on it. I know. That's why it works. Sophie stood, pulling him up with her. "Come on, I want to show you something." They drove to Providence General, where Alexander still worked night security twice a week. He'd refused to quit, said he needed to remember where he came from. The pediatric wing was quiet, most of the children asleep, but Sophie led him to the window where they'd first really talked. The roof access where she'd told him about her family. Seattle spread out before them, the city lights beginning to sparkle as night fell. But tonight, the view was different. Spring had softened everything, made it new. "This is where it started," Sophie said, leaning against the railing. "Where I first thought maybe you were more than just a security guard with secrets. You saw through me from the beginning. I saw someone in pain who was trying to hide it. I didn't know why, but I recognized it." She turned to face him, the city lights reflecting in her gray eyes. "And I'm glad I did. I'm glad you walked into this hospital. I'm glad you were brave enough to tell the truth, even when it cost you everything." Alexander pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. "It didn't cost me everything. It gave me everything that actually matters." They stood there as night settled over Seattle, two people who'd found each other in the darkness of a hospital corridor during the loneliest season of the year. They'd both been running. Sophie from a past full of debt and sacrifice, Alexander from a legacy built on suffering. But they'd stopped running and started building instead. Below them, the hospital hummed with life. Babies being born, surgeries being performed, people fighting for one more day. And in the foundation office across town, files were stacked with applications from families who needed help, waiting for approval that would come, because Alexander had finally done something that mattered. The cherry blossoms would fall soon, and summer would arrive with its own challenges. The legal battles weren't completely over. Richard Bennett was already planning his comeback, and the pharmaceutical industry had 1,000 ways to maintain profit margins. The fight wasn't finished, but tonight, on a rooftop in Seattle with spring air soft around them and the woman he loved in his arms, Alexander Bennett felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Not because he'd earned forgiveness. He was still working on that. But because he was finally living a life that meant something beyond his last name, beyond money and legacy, and the weight of expectations he'd never asked for. "What are you thinking?" Sophie asked, her voice soft. "That I'm grateful. For you. For this. For the chance to try to be better." Sophie smiled up at him, and in her eyes he saw his future. Messy and complicated and real. "You know what my abuela used to say? El amor no es perfecto, pero es verdadero." Love isn't perfect, but it's true. I like that. Me too. Sophie took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Come on, let's go home." Home. Such a simple word, but it meant everything now. Not a mansion or a legacy or a name in bronze letters on a building downtown. Home was a small house in Capitol Hill with a garden waiting to be planted. Home was Sophie's laugh in the morning and her hand in his at night. Home was work that mattered, and love that was real, and the knowledge that he was finally on the right path. They left the hospital together, driving through Seattle streets soft with spring rain. The radio played something gentle and hopeful, and Sophie sang along under her breath, slightly off-key and absolutely perfect. By the time they reached their house, stars were appearing between clouds, and the cherry tree in their front yard was heavy with blooms that would fall and return and fall again, the cycle of things ending and beginning and ending again. Alexander carried Sophie across the threshold. She laughed and protested it was silly. They'd been living there for weeks. But he did it anyway because some moments deserved to be marked, remembered, celebrated. Inside, their small house waited, books scattered on surfaces. Sophie's nursing textbooks mixed with Alexander's foundation paperwork. photos on the walls of both their families, because Sophie insisted that healing meant not erasing the past, just learning to live with it differently. They made dinner together, nothing fancy, just pasta and wine and conversation that flowed easy and warm. And later, lying in bed with Sophie curled against his side, Alexander listened to her breathing even out into sleep and felt gratitude so profound it ached. He thought about Melissa Chen, about Sophie's father, about all the people his family's company had hurt. He couldn't undo that damage, but he could make sure it didn't continue. He could build something better with the wreckage, could turn inherited guilt into deliberate good. It would never be enough, but it was something. And something, he'd learned, was infinitely better than nothing. Outside, spring rain fell soft on Seattle, washing the world clean one gentle drop at a time. Cherry blossoms drifted past the window, pink and white and temporary and beautiful precisely because they wouldn't last. And Alexander Bennett, former heir to an empire built on suffering, current director of a foundation dedicated to dismantling that same system, finally closed his eyes and slept without nightmares for the first time in years. He dreamed of gardens growing and children laughing, and a future where love and justice weren't opposing forces, but two parts of the same truth. He dreamed of Sophie's smile and cherry blossoms and the possibility of redemption. And when morning came with birdsong and soft light, he woke to find her still there, still real, still choosing him every day despite everything. That was enough. That was everything. If this story touched you, leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and subscribe for the next journey.